Okay, so let's begin by adding a cylinder. And now the thing with the cylinders, probably you know that, but in case you do not, before we make it even editable, I would like to go here into rotation segments and adjust those. So if I go here quickly to, we'll leave it to wireframe mode, but we can change it to Gore shading with lines just to see where our future edges will be. And also if I go to top camera, I just want to show you something. So for example, here we have an arrow, axis arrow, which is Z axis currently pointing in upwards direction. And then we have X axis pointing in the right direction. And as you can notice, they're perfectly aligned with our edges. And this is good simply because what we can then choose if we decide to make this editable, we can decide to choose this part, which is actually 1/4, and we can actually create a symmetry and just work on 1/4 of the model if this is something that we would need later on. So when working with cylinders, is always a good thing to plan ahead and see what kind of objects are you planning to do with the cylinders. That also depends what complexity will it have, and does it need to be full of details, because if it does need to be full of details and this is what you plan, like cuts and so on, then higher rotational segments is necessary. But you will notice that over time when you see, like, for example, you're missing some details and you need more edges, then probably we'll need to increase that. Now, what I talked about this, that edges are aligned with the axes. So the same thing goes if I hit number 20, which is a number of segments that I most commonly use. So between 20 and 28 at the max, this is the number that I use. So 20 and 24, I would say most often if I need to choose a number. What you notice between these numbers is that all of them have axes aligned with the edges. If I would hit, let's say 22, which is even a number as well, you will see that now the axes are not aligned anymore. So that means if you would like to do something on one half and let's say copy it to another half, you would have this problem where you couldn't determine the full center. So my practice is that I'm always trying to keep it in intervals of 4. So rotational segments, so let's say 16, it's still going to be aligned. Let's say if we choose 14, actually I wanted to say 14, it will be now different rotational number, because now we are trying and to reduce that polygon number. So again, you will need to mix and match and see where your axes are actually aligning. So as we can see here, so what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna use 20 just so that we have this alignment. So let's go back into our perspective view. And at this point, I'm really not sure we'll be doing any symmetry, but just in case, I wanted to mention that. So now we have a cylinder, and what we need to do next is make the cylinder editable, meaning that now if I try to use any points, or if I try to use any operations connected to adding more edge loops or extrusions, I cannot do that because I need to create the cylinder into polygonal object, and you can do that by going here where it says make editable. So once we do that, we can see now that we can come here and select the points, so like this, select the edges, or select the polygons. So that's the first step. Additional thing with the cylinder, if I now go into polygon mode, so basically I'll just hover over it and it'll set polygon mode. And by the way, by switching enter, so hitting enter key on your keyboard, you can switch between points, edges, and I'll just select here polygons. So as you can see here, just switch enter and that's the hotkey. What I wanted to say is when we have selected polygons on top, for example, and push it up, we can see that it's actually not connected to the cylinder. This is something with cylindrical objects, so you need to be sure whenever you work with the cylinders that you go select everything, so Control A or Command A, and simply right click and go to optimize. Again, hotkey for that is right here. So it's important that you also remember hotkeys because later we're going to use those. So now when we have this optimized, and if I come here and select this polygons, you'll see that now actually is all connected. And this is what we need. So this is our base. And now we can begin working on this object. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to hit R for rotation, or simply I will go here to click on rotate and then rotate. And while holding shift key, I will rotate between 10 degrees. So I will come here to 90%. In case you would like to rotate with more than 90 degrees, you would need to go to mode and then go into modeling and then go into quantize and change the rotation from 10 to, let's say, 15%. And then now if you rotate and hold shift key, you will see that it's rotating every 15 degrees. So 15, 30, 45. It's good if you want to reach that 45 angle, but for now I will just leave it to 10. So let's rotate it to 90 degrees. And what I would like to do here now before we begin, actually add a symmetry, because I would like to work symmetrical on the right side so that everything that we do on the right side copies to the left side. So we can add a symmetry by adding an object here. So here's symmetry. But before we actually add the cylinder into the symmetry, I would like to add a cut in the middle. So I can do right click, loop path cut, and position it right here. Now you can find the middle by simply clicking anywhere on the object and hitting this little icon right here. This will position it in the middle. Or you can simply hold shift key. And as you can see, we have predetermined cuts that we can select. And again, you can select those cuts by quantize step 5. And if you select 3 of them, then the middle one should be actually in the right center. So you can put that, and if you want to check, you can just click on this icon again. So what I need to do now, when we have this done, I need to remove, if I now again come here. So again, I will just hover really quick over this icon right here, which is our live selection tool, and we will see it says shortcut 9. So instead of us moving the mouse every time and selecting either live selection or rectangle selection, so we have 9 and 0. I will just switch, so you'll see the icon right here. We have on the mouse rectangle. If I hit 9, it will become circle. So I will constantly switch between those two by hitting 9 and 0. So again, this is very good practice if you wish to speed up some of your workflow. So let's select now all of these parts that we want to remove. So now again, instead of selecting it all like this by hand, what we can do is select V on our keyboard and go to select, and then we can go to loop selection. That means that whatever is forming a loop, we can select and then simply delete. Now hitting V and then select and finding loop selection again has hotkeys, so UL, and whenever I say let's use loop selection, I will be using this hotkey. I just want to show you where it is if you are not familiar with the hotkeys just yet. So let's delete this and delete this part as well. So now we can add this part of the cylinder in the symmetry. But before we do, I just want to show you one thing. When we go into points, you will see that some of the points here are still selected. So if I hit select all, you'll notice that the points from something that we deleted are still there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit 0 to select live selection, actually rectangle selection, select all these unnecessary points and delete them. Also, what we can do is select all and go to right click and optimize. So basically optimization will remove any unnecessary points. So optimize. Okay, so now we are ready to put the cylinder into the symmetry. So nothing is happening because we do need to say to the symmetry which mirror plane do we want. For now we had XY. Actually we had ZY as a default, but if we change that values, then we should find the proper symmetry. So we have some interlapping here, but we can just move it aside and position it, let's say, somewhere like here. Now, one thing here what I would like to show you is that symmetry has some additional options. So I'm gonna just put it, let's say, this close, that they are almost touching, because I would like to show you a couple of options. So let's turn the symmetry off, and I just want to make sure. Okay, so let's go into tolerance and increase the tolerance, because tolerance actually asks you how close do the points need to be together before I decide either to clamp points and axes, which we want, or delete polygons and axes. So this tolerance number is connected to these values right here. So we're gonna increase this number to something like 0.5. This is the value that I use most often. So now if I turn the symmetry on and push, I would like to just go back a bit if possible. Okay, so once we come close, these two objects will snap together and then there won't be that gap. And in addition, I would like to create one other thing just to show you what else we can use. So let's use loop selection. So again, loop selection V, select, and loop selection or UL as a hotkey while in edge mode. And then what I like to do is extrude these edges. So I'm going to right click and extrude. And then what I'm going to do now, when I have these new edges selected, I'm going to use scale to scale down to create new edges. And then while still in scale mode, I'm going to select this little handle and I'm holding shift key. I'm just going to push it until actually we need to select this loop. So now by selecting scale, we can simply hold the shift key while on the axis that we want to actually scale. So I'm going to scale this axis. And by holding shift key, I can make it to come directly to 0. And now we have full straight line. So if I now here select the full model and turn the symmetry on, and I would like to show you now what happens if we go into options and X-ray. So we have this connection right in the middle, and this can cause some really problems and deformations that you might not sure what they are. So that's why we have this option, delete polygons and axes. So I'll just turn it off and turn it on to make it again active, and you will see that actually it's deleted the polygons with the tolerance that we set. So that's a really important tool that we're going to use. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually create something and create interesting looking shape from this cylinder. So first what I'd like to do is, let's say, select this area right here. So I'm going to hit 9 to select everything here. And then I'm going to go to right click and extrude inner, just simply to add additional edge loop. Now we could have done exactly the same thing by going here and adding loop path cut and simply adding an edge. So it's exactly the same thing. It's now just a matter of preference what you would like to do. So let's create something like this, and I will create one more and then maybe push it inwards just a bit. And then, well, instead of going here to extrude, you can also simply go into move, and then while holding command key, you can push it inwards. And then we have something like this, which is okay just for starters. So let's go and add more edge loops. So I'm going to add, let's say, one edge loop here. And now what I would like to do is select the polygons around this area and simply scale it up. But the problem is, if I'm scaling it up, I'm going to scale it all the way to next closest edge, which is this one. So I don't want that. I would like to have this pushed up, but it stops right here. So what we need here then is a supportive edge, same as this one, so that actually it's not going all the way to here, but it stops here. So we're just going to go to loop path cut and add an edge where we would like it to stop. So I'm going to put it right in the middle, and then I'm going to go back into polygon mode, hit T for scale, and then simply scale this pod up. And then we have something like that. Okay, now actually what we can do is do it a bit more interesting. So what I'm gonna do is exactly the same, but this time if you would like to do something with these two selections. So if I select scale, we have again same problem. So now what I'm gonna do is add another loop path cut and create additional supporting edge right here. So now if I go T for scale and increase, then we have something like that. Okay, so now that we have something like, let's say in these lines, what we can maybe do is with this edge, just push it a bit more inside. So let's use UL for loop selection. So UL is a hotkey, and let's just use move tool again. Move is shortcut E. So let's just push it something like this. So this is very basic and very simple shape. And what we're trying to do is just create a base for our, let's say, hydraulics or something that rotates along these this cylinder. So, okay, so now that we have this very basic cylinder, what we can do is maybe this edge, just push, let's say somewhere in the middle like this. And there we are. So we have our basic cylindrical object. So now we can do is create something more of that. So let's go ahead and use a loop selection and select these two parts. And what we can do now is actually, I would like to reuse this selection for a new object. So meaning that instead of creating everything from scratch, I would just like to reuse this part that is now selected and create new geometry from there. So in order to do that, we can go to right click and use split options. So split, again, hotkey is UP. So in the future, when I mention let's use split, I'm going to use this hotkey. So every operation it's found on right click. So whatever you need regarding either polygons or edges or points, even if something is connected to point, all you need to right click and every operation will be right there. So same thing here. So let's use split. And you notice right here that we have now cylinder 1, which is our new object. So let's call this add-on. I'm not sure does go like this or in any case, we created our add-on. Let's go Command Alt to select all. And now what we can do is maybe extrude it outwards. So see how that goes. So let's do an extrusion. And basically now what we have this transparent area, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good. So you can choose if you want to work with X-ray or not. Well, I mentioned sometimes good, sometimes not good. You need to be careful when using extrude, because if you use create caps option, in some situations you actually do not want to create these caps. In this case, maybe we do want to, so you can see what's happening. But if you see strange deformation on some surface and you use extrude in that area, there's possibility that you might left create caps on. But for now, I will go to display and actually options and turn X-ray off. So now we have additional object on top of our cylinder, but the problem is it's not symmetrical as we want it to be. So in this case, we have two options. We can simply use this add-on as a part of the cylinder, actually as a child of the cylinder. So we can add it inside like this, and the cylinder becomes the parent of our add-on child. Or we can simply, I'll just go back, simply select these two objects and go to Alt G, and this will actually group it into a null group. So also another way how we can go that. So while we're here, I just want to show you actually how you can create additional copies. So it's standard copy and paste. It works, Control C, Control V. You can simply hold Command or Control and push it down, or simply while the object is selected, you can hover on the axis where you want to copy it, hold Command, and then push it out. So it works in both directions. It also works actually with scaling. So if you wish, you can also scale. Also works with the rotation. Just hold Command and rotate it will create copies. So that's how you can create copies real quick. So I'm gonna hit E to go to move mode. Hold Command, and while I'm the axis, move this up so that I have something like, let's say, this right here. And what I would like to do here is to connect these two objects together. So basically that we have connection between this add-on and this, and that they have something in the middle. So we're gonna do that next. Before we can connect these two objects, I would like to collapse them into one object. So I'm gonna select both of them and go connect objects plus delete. And now we'll have one object out of two. And what I would like to do next is just to select the polygons that I would like to copy. So let's say all the way to here. So if we will go to extrude, now that it connects there. And these what are now selected, what I would like to do is I would like to simply delete those. So let's hit delete, and let's go here and do the same. So just make sure that you have the same number of selections. So the number that we selected in this area needs to match this number. So I'm gonna again delete those. And now what we can do is go to the edge mode, and we need to do now select all of the edges that are forming our outline. Now again, you can use, instead of going one by one, you can go to our loop selection. So I'm gonna hit EUL as a hotkey, and then we have an option here maybe to select this loop. In case we do not get that option, so I'm trying to find it, but we're not getting it. What we can do is go to E, so select the move mode, and simply double click, and then hold shift so that we can add more selections. Double click again, and double click, hold shift and double click. So basically now we have our selection, and I'm going to come here as well. Just make sure you're holding shift to include all of the selections. Okay, so now that we have these two selections, what we can do now next is go to option that is called stitch and sew. There are actually two options. So one is bridge, which allows us to connect edges to their neighboring edges. So we need to go this one by one. If we would like to do it all at once, we would actually need to go to stitch and sew and then select one point where we want to connect. So let's say this point we need to connect to this one, but we just need to make sure that we have the same amount of edges selected and that we don't have any edges that we forgot. So something like this. Now, as for what this operation can do, so for example, if I now go to stitch and sew and hold shift key, it will give me this result. If I go to control and shift key, it will give me this result. Basically, it will connect them in the middle. And if I do it without any operation, it will just connect these two edges. So here, what I would like to do is use maybe a shift operation, so something like that, and then add our own edge loop right in the middle. So I wanted to do connect loop path cut and simply add an edge right in the middle. So now that we have this, what we can do is actually add a cylinder into this area here. But now you notice that maybe we could have used symmetry. So basically that we do only half and the other half that we just mirror. We could have done that as well, but just I wanted to show you this way. But what we could have done differently here is I will just do a quick representation of what we could have done differently here. So there are many ways to achieve same results. So it's just about which one you prefer. So what I'm going to do now is just go into move mode, double click here, hold shift, double click here, double click here. And then what I can do now is actually extrude this. So I'm going to hold a command and extrude this while holding. So basically hold command until you see this little icon, and then you just hover over the axis and then extrude it. Then I can hit T for scale and then simply scale the axis so that I have this result. So basically now I can use this axis, hold shift until we go back to 0. And then we have a result like this. So now what I can do is I can add a symmetry here. And while holding Alt key, the symmetry will become a parent of our add-on. And then basically just we need to find appropriate axes. And again, I will just need to reposition it. And for some reason, I need to adjust this as well. And let's clamp, and this is the same result. So this is the alternative to what we did. And now if you would like to, okay, so I'm going to show you now one other thing what you can do with the symmetry and the axes. So for example, we would like to create the symmetry of this cylinder here up. Now, if I add a symmetry here and simply add, let's say, this cylinder into a symmetry, and let's just play with the variations, you'll see that basically nothing happens only it gives us the symmetry on the left side. The reason for that is our axis is set right in the middle. As you can notice, the axis is right in the middle of where the symmetry is copying this object. So what we will need to do here is something else. So what I'd like to do first is just, I will put it here in this symmetry, and I will make it, I will select both, connect objects plus delete. Okay, so now we have one object right here. And if I go here and add a symmetry object, so, and put this into a symmetry object, you will see that basically nothing happens regardless of what we try to do. So here what we need to do is actually change the axis itself. If I hit symmetry, you will see that the symmetry axis is also right in the center. But what would happen if I change the axis of the symmetry into something else so that it's not here, but let's say it's somewhere else? So to do that, we can go here to enable axes. Hotkey for that is L, and you'll see that it will become, you will have this little icon. Just, you notice that it now becomes square. That means that you can now move and edit the axes, and nothing will happen to the object. So you can rotate, scale, the object will still remain the same. And if I now turn this off, apply the symmetry object, and if I now try and do the symmetry, it will actually create that symmetrical object on the axis that we specified. So now we need to do exactly the same thing, but to make sure that our axis is in the middle so that it can give us perfect symmetrical copy here on top as well. So let's do that. So let's take the axis of this symmetry, make sure that we enable it. And now what we need to do is position it here in the middle. So now next, instead of eyeballing this middle, so now we need to go here and make sure that it kind of fits into the middle. What we need to do is enable snap, and make sure that auto snapping is on and also vertex snapping is on, because we would like to snap this to this middle vertex. So I can now click just anywhere and hold this click. And while I'm holding this click, I can simply come here and snap it to our object right here. So I maybe disabled it by accident, so just make sure that it's enabled again. And as soon as I come close, you will see it says add-on to vertex snap. Basically, it's snapping to an object called add-on to and vertex snap. So now we have the place where we'd like to our symmetry to make place, and now I just need to disable snapping and disable axis modification. And when I add my object into the symmetry, now I just need to find a proper mirror plane, and there we are. So this covers the very basic workflow of what we're gonna do in terms of what how we modify our topology, how we modify our how we modify our objects, and what are our options. So in the next video, what we're gonna do is actually try to add a bit more, let's say, life to this object, make it look a bit more interesting. For now, it's looking very real plain. And then from there on, we're just gonna keep going and constantly do a bit more detail, a bit more complex objects, and so on and so on. So this first couple of videos should be very basic, but as we go further down the line, this should be also then a bit more challenging, but again, a bit more interesting. So I really hoped this information here was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to ask anything, and see you in the next video.